Well, good afternoon. The Senate Committee on Appropriations is called to order. Mr. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Chair Anthony.
Here.
Senator McCann. Senator Cherry. Senator Bear. Senator Santana. Senator Schenck. Senator Irwin. Senator Hertel. Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Kleinfeld. Senator McMorrow. Senator Camilleri. Senator Bumstead. Senator Albert. Senator DeMoose. Senator Heisinger. Senator Outman. And Senator Tice. Madam Chair, you have 17 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. I now move to adopt the minutes from the March 19th, 2025 committee hearing, supported by Senator Bumstead. Without objection, the minutes are adopted. Well, we do have a full agenda this afternoon, and I wanted just to frame our conversation today. There's been much conversation around road funding and our current infrastructure that continues to crumble. We've heard it from stakeholders, we've heard it from residents, and we believe that because of the impact on our entire state's budget, making sure that we appropriated time to discuss road funding and the various aspects of this very complex system was important for us to do in full appropriation. So we appreciate so many of the discussions, the conversations, the work papers that have been presented to not only our transportation chair, Senator Kleinfeld, but also to individual members. Today's discussion will be a combination of reviewing a plan from the House that was recently passed right before spring break. We'll also hear from the Citizens Research Council, which is an independent body that informs lots of our work and has done a number of papers related to roads and infrastructure here in the state of Michigan. And then finally, we will hear from the Senate Fiscal Agency, because these decisions have significant financial impact on our budget, and it's important for this body to put the pieces together. And so the last thing I'll say before we get started is the Senate is known for being a deliberative body, and that is the purpose of today's conversation, is for us to dig into the details. I don't think anyone in Michigan can deny that we need to do something to fix our roads. It's something we hear from so many of our constituents, and at the same time, making sure that we're balancing our infrastructure with the human impact of some of the federal cuts, programs that many of our constituents expect and deserve from state government. It's our job to put the pieces together. So including reforms and looking at efficiencies in and around state government. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our colleagues in the House. I'd like to invite the Transportation Chair, Representative Outman, to come forward. And then you can also introduce your colleagues who have joined you today. And as a reminder, Chair Outman, we want to allot for maybe 7 to 10 minutes just to discuss the essence of the bill package. And I know a few of our members will likely have some questions as well. So sure. Appreciate your time, Chair.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Chair Anthony, and thank you to the members of this committee for the opportunity to present the House Road Funding Plan and to participate in this crucial discussion on how we can finally fix Michigan's roads. For far too long, Michiganders have been forced to live with deteriorating roads and broken promises. We've seen the crumbling infrastructure every day, and we hear about it constantly from our constituents. And now we're staring down the barrel of a road funding cliff that threatens to make a bad situation even worse. The plan we're presenting today tackles these challenges head on, without raising taxes on Michigan families, and dedicates an additional $3.1 billion annually to road repairs, with a strong emphasis on the local roads that people rely on every single day. Now, I understand that $3.1 billion in existing revenue is a bold ask, and some of you may have your doubts, but all I ask today is that you hear us out. As you know, Michigan families are already being squeezed by rising costs, and that's why we're committed to funding this plan entirely with existing state resources. While residents have had to make tough financial decisions, the state government has not. In fact, Michigan's state budget has grown by nearly 50% over the last 8 years. Since I took office just 4 years ago, it's grown by $10 billion. The money is already there. The real question is, are we willing to spend it more wisely? To get into specifics, House Bill 4187 redirects $2.2 billion in corporate income tax revenue towards roads. That includes roughly $600 million currently going towards pet projects and SOAR-funded corporate subsidies. These are areas where we believe the state can afford to scale back. Not essential services like public safety, education, or healthcare, but programs we can live without until we fix the more fundamental issues that's holding our state back, our crumbling infrastructure. While Michigan families dodge potholes and drive over deteriorating roads, major corporations have been handed oversized checks from Lansing. And I think we can all agree that it's time we prioritize the needs of the people who actually pay the bills. Here's how that $2.2 billion would be distributed. 10% to MDOT for state-managed roads, 50% to county road commissions, and 40% to cities and villages. This formula ensures that the funding goes where it's needed most, local roads, the ones our constituents drive on every single day. For years, local roads have been overlooked while state resources were disproportionately directed towards major highway projects. This administration's bonding plan poured billions of dollars into rebuilding freeways and interstates, but that money didn't trickle down to the roads in our communities. Now that those bonded dollars are drying up, MDOT will now face mounting pressures to shift even more funding back to our major roads, putting an even greater strain on an already crumbling local road system. It's the county roads, city streets, and township gravel roads that carry school buses, emergency vehicles, farmers, and families, and they've been left behind for far too long. Our plan changes that by putting local infrastructure front and center where it belongs. And we're taking that one step further with the creation of the Neighborhood Roads Fund, a dedicated source specifically for repairing and maintaining streets in our cities, villages, and townships. This plan also invests $100 million per year for the repair of local bridges, finally allowing communities to address the growing number of closed, critical, and restricted bridges across the state. One more key change. Under this plan, townships will no longer be required to match county road funding. That's a major financial hurdle. We're eliminating it. It will empower townships to fix their roads without the heavy burden of local matching requirements. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues to walk you through some other important components of the bill. With me, I have State Representative Tom Coons and State Representative Steve Frisbee. Tom.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for having us here. The chairman covered it very clearly. We need to come up with the money. We've done it without raising taxes. I think there's a lot of similarities in the concept that the governor has shared. Moving the gas tax over, the sales tax from fuel, pay to the pump, moving that over the road is the single largest component of our plan, and I think we agree on that. So we're a lot closer. I don't read the newspaper very often because it doesn't tell its truth, but I think we're a lot closer than what the press might have us believe. So I'm very optimistic about this.
What I would add is I served 14 years as a county commissioner. In the last 12, I was a de facto road commissioner because we eliminated our road commission in Calhoun County. And we took on that challenge internally. And we did as good as we could with the revenue we had. And we made some huge impacts in local roads. That driveway to highway system that everybody's talking about that needs the most repair. Where we stalled out was when these small townships and villages could not come up with the 50% match. And that's what's exciting about this program. The $375 million essentially into roads and bridges and local roads that would eliminate that 50% match. If you take a small township in Calhoun County or any county in Michigan, they could levy 1 mil, which is a huge tax increase for many people. They're going to generate 50 to 60 to 70,000 in some of these places. That does a quarter mile or less by the time you get to today's prices. That's unacceptable. And that's my experience of where I ran into and our body ran into. We're against a wall at a funding cliff that we can't overcome because there's just not enough money in this system. Now, I hear the criticisms of Act 51. And I agree, it does need some reform. But to try to reform that and fix roads at the same time, you know as well as I do, that funds several issues, including mass transportation, rail, non-motorized paths, and everybody's going to have a fight. That's not an easy fix. It's going to take a very deliberate action to get that done. We're willing to take that up, but we don't want to wait on fixing roads as a result of that. Therefore, these plans go outside of Act 51, and as Representative Outman explained, how they fund and where they impact. And that driveway to highway system are where people are angry about needing repair. And if we do it with all new revenue, I can tell you right now, you're not going to find support amongst the people in the state of Michigan. There is a way to do this with existing revenue, as we've described. We've heard some of the criticism that we're going to cut, but I want to remind you, MTA, MML, the county MAC, and all the others who we've backfilled. We filled the housing gap. We refilled that. We refilled the school aid fund. So all those, we're going to cut health care. Those are all unjust attacks against this plan. That is simply not true. It is well described how those funds are going to come. You know.
Oh, and if you could just wrap up a few moments, because I know we have to start asking a few questions.
Yes,
so.
and with that, we will wrap up and take questions. Madam Chair, we really thank you for the opportunity to present our plan. We want to partner with you guys. We partnered with our House Democrats, and we're able to make this a bipartisan plan, and we're hoping to continue that. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chair. All right, I knew there's a few questions. I think I'll take the first question. So again, in this room, we look at the budget in its totality. And if we were to assume that we took this plan wholesale, I think it's safe to assume, and I think we have some analysts that are here today that will probably be able to confirm, that we would have to make some significant reductions in places such as health and human services, corrections, universities, and community colleges. There's not that many places that we can find the amount of funding in order to assume that this plan would actually be done with fidelity. And so I guess my first question would be, did you all contemplate where the revenue would come from? And I know that the plan that's before us, it has some one-time funds, it shifts some funds here and there. You referenced that state government has grown significantly. Well, you know that some of that was due to one-time COVID relief dollars that, increased the size of state government. Hopefully we don't have another global pandemic. So I guess my big question is, knowing that we have to meet the needs of the entire state, where would some of those reductions come from, in your opinion?
Well, just to keep in mind, Senator Anthony, our state budget is now at $83 billion being proposed. If Governor Whitmer gets her budget recommendation, it'll grow to $86 billion. Mm-hmm. When I took office, it was $72 billion. We've expired all those one-time COVID dollars. Mm-hmm. That money's gone. We're now back to a regular budget. And what I'm saying is, we need to reprioritize what we're spending our money on. The vast majority of the cuts we're proposing come from corporate handouts, corporate subsidies. Those are what we're trying to pare back and reprioritize that money into roads. We're not looking to cut any essential services, particularly with public health, particularly with public safety or education, and you have my commitment on that.
Okay. Senator Camilleri.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, representatives, for being here. Let's talk a little bit more about education. So as I'm watching some of the action out of the House, the first thing that House Republicans and your new majority you passed was an education budget to the tune of $15 billion. Our annual education budget is $20 billion. So you funded something at the state education budget per your proposal at $5 billion less. So a $5 billion cut at what would normally be assumed to be the $20 billion education budget. So we have that on the table, and now we have a roads plan that you are going to be shifting some of those funds from the sales tax, which is about $750 million or so, that you would be then, in theory, backfilling. So I have on one hand a plan that cuts $5 billion from you all. Now you've got another opportunity here to potentially shift $750 million. I guess I'm just wondering how we are going to protect education funding when all we're seeing from some of these proposals is less money going back to our schools.
Yeah, and Senator Camilleri, thank you for that question. I'll just say we haven't even passed our budget yet. We have not passed our House budget yet.
You passed a budget that was $5 billion less than this year.
That was not our budget. That was a stopgap measure, an insurance policy that would fund all the government essential services in case we got into a budget showdown, a budget shutdown situation. That was not our budget.
Schools could not operate with $5 billion less, to be clear.
We agree.
We understand. That's why that's not our budget. That's the very last doomsday situation that we wanted to get in front of and be prepared for. But you have my commitment. We're not cutting education. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised when we actually do pass our school aid budget. You know, it might not be passed as soon as you would like it and as soon as I would like it, because I would like to pass it in July so schools can have time to plan and prep per that allocation. But you have my commitment. We are not going to cut education within our school aid budget. What we passed was an emergency preparation stopgap measure in case we got to a situation in September, October, where we couldn't reach the consensus. But we want to make sure that all the various government essential services are being funded during that time period until we could come together and reach that consensus as a legislative body.
So to be clear, did you just tell me that we're not passing a budget by July 1st?
Well, I'm not our appropriations chair, and I don't even serve on appropriations. I'm just anticipating that it might not be done until after July. I hope I'm wrong on that.
I hope so too. I think we've got a clear deadline in our statute that we should be meeting, and I do think there's a lot that we can hopefully agree on. But let's get back to the main question here. How are you backfilling the $750 million per this proposal? What does that look like? Because typically you would be essentially moving money from SAF to cover those gaps for higher ed. So how exactly would you be backfilling that?
And that's why we wanted to tie bar these bills together, because the sales tax comes over. We wanted to tie bar, it's House Bill 4185. Representative Linting proposed that one. And that exactly does. It brings over $755 million of sales tax to the school aid fund to replace that. Yep. And that's why we wanted to tie bar it together, because we're not going to take the money out of sales tax unless both bills pass.
Yeah, and just to put into some perspective, that $800 billion that you mentioned is less than 1% of our overall state budget. We can find that money pretty easily without affecting any sort of essential services. We just got to trim back some of the non-essential services a little bit, you know, continuing on that theme of cutting the corporate subsidies, cutting some of these pork barrel spending and these random earmarks that we've seen in the budget these last couple of years. Get back to that basic budget principle that we should be practicing already. Michigan families are tightening their belts all across this state, and I think we should do the same just a little bit here in the state of Michigan.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up to the next question. Thank you, Senator. Senator McMorrow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, representatives, for being here today and for presenting the House Roads Plan. I want to go back to a comment that was made about the PA 51 formula, and a comment was made that includes things like transit, and that the proposal is not to address that at this moment and instead focus on funding the roads. There's also been commentary on reallocating the SOAR funding into this plan. As you well know, the SOAR funding earmark expired in 2025 anyway, and you would find bipartisan support in reform for SOAR. We had put up a SOAR reform plan that would have reallocated $200 million annually instead of going into the SOAR fund to go into funding transit. What we know is that per the House committee testimony, transit already has a $400 million funding shortfall. So is there a concern that in your proposal, if we are not addressing transit funding, that we are actually increasing wear and tear on the roads and exacerbating an issue at a moment when our constituents are telling us we need a robust transit system and we also need an alternative to driving in a state that has some of the highest car insurance costs in the nation?
Yeah, and very much appreciate your question, Senator McMorrow. I will just say, yes, the primary focus of this plan addresses our roads and bridges. But public transit also gets an increase in this plan as well. We're pumping $1 billion into the top of the PA 51 formula. That's going to provide an extra $100 million to our public transit. Now, is that enough? It sounds like it's not, and we still need some work to do. But you alluded to it. Our primary focus is fixing our crumbling roads and our crumbling bridges, and then we can start to approach the public transit and increase that as well, because that is that is definitely a primary concern of mine as well. I don't have nearly the public transit system that you do in your district, but I have some dial-a-rides that are dying on the vine, and I have a lot of constituents that depend on those as well. And so I do want to continue working on funding public transit at the adequate level, but it's the primary focus of this plan is addressing our crumbling roads and bridges.
Thank you. If I could just go back to an earlier part of the question, given that the $500 million earmark to SOAR already expires at the end of fiscal year 25, where are you advising that we reallocate dollars from? What is being cut to fund this plan?
And I should also point out, a part of our emphasis is eliminating the mega credits. That we're hoping that will bring in an additional $500 to $6 million as well. I would, respectfully, I would like to not reform SOAR and just to take all that money and dump it into our infrastructure system as it is. I'm not a giant fan of these corporate incentives and corporate handouts personally. I understand a lot of my colleagues might disagree with that approach. Continuing to eliminate those corporate earmarks, those corporate subsidies, eliminate those mega credits, that's going to free up a lot of money that we can dump into our infrastructure.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit on the mega credits because I'm thinking about this globally and some of the tariff conversations that are happening. Many of the companies that employ thousands of businesses in this state have relied on those mega credits to essentially ensure that they stay open. Have you consulted with any of those companies throughout the state of Michigan just to see how this plan would impact, honestly, their ability to stay open?
Well, I'll be honest with you, they don't like it. They don't like this part of our plan. Some were pretty agnostic to it because some of these companies, they're getting off the mega credit roll at the end of this year, at the end of next year, so it's not as big a factor. It really does affect GM and Ford the most. We're hoping that by not raising the corporate income tax revenue, corporate income tax rate like Governor Whitmer is proposing, that they will see some benefits to maintaining a fair tax system, and they will be able to swallow that loss in those mega credits. That's my hope. But.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Hertel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, representatives, for being here today to share some of the information from this plan with us. I want to go back to some of the comments that were made about Public Act 51. This is something that I've worked on my entire time in the legislature. I've sponsored legislation to change Public Act 51. I've worked in a bipartisan way with my colleagues from Macomb and Oakland counties in order to do that. And we've always hit a political roadblock, I'll be very honest, because we know that it will impact the revenue that some communities get. So I understand the challenges to changing the formula. But I think we have an opportunity here today, and that's to fix what is a broken formula for road funding here in the state of Michigan. And I think to not take that opportunity is a huge mistake. When you look at, and we're going to have the Citizens Research Council testify to their research report later on today. If you look at road funding today in the state of Michigan, we're putting more money into roads than we did anytime since 2004. But it's going through a broken system and not getting to where it needs to go. So I'm not against finding more money to put in our roads. I think we need to do that. But I am against putting more money into a system that is fundamentally broken and that is causing more of my residents' taxpayers to go to other areas of the state, and they do not see the benefit of it. We have the most of the economic activity happens in my region of the state. And when you look at this distribution per mile, per capita, by county, it is Macomb and Wayne, which I represent, and Oakland, which are the bottom of the list for increases. Meaning we put all this revenue into this formula, and the places that need to see the benefit of the most will not see it. And so I think we need to take the opportunity we have in front of us, find more revenue for roads, but put it into a reformed formula that actually makes sense and gets the money to where it needs to go. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So not all of our funding goes in the top of PA 51. Ours is kind of a two-prong attack. The sales tax swap, which again, I'm excited that the governor agrees with, does go in the top of PA 51. and that goes through the formula. The rest of the money we're allocating with the 45, 45, 10, 10 being MDOT to there. But to the point is, you're right, it has a smaller increase, but everybody increases. What our plan does is it increases the pie. I'm concerned when we look at PA 51, just on my history of it, there have been 5 blue ribbon committees or task force or everything, and they have been bipartisan because Governor Granholm has done them, Governor Snyder has done them, and now the Citizens Research Council is going to come in and they're going to say the same thing. They did a research paper, but they don't understand road funding. And frankly, I'm surprised that the testimony of the County Road Association and MIDA and the counties, that takes precedence. They understand road funding better than a research paper, so.
And I've had disagreements with some of the folks you mentioned on this over the years as well. And I think what the challenge is that in order to do the right thing here, it's going to take some political will for people to look at this issue for what it actually is, realize that it's unfair. At its most basic level, Public Act 51 was created in 1951 when we were funding infrastructure in outstate areas, and communities like mine were willing to do that at the time to help development in other areas of the state. We are now at a place where the roads in my district have taken some of the worst toll over the years, and we have a lack of investment because of the formula coming back into those communities. And it's really hard to support anything that doesn't fix that issue and actually get the money where it needs to go, because without doing that and without having the political will to do that, we're simply just not solving a problem, and I'm here to actually solve that problem.
So
Okay, I want to make sure I get to as many questions as possible. I have Senator Cherry and then Senator DeMuse, and then we have a few more after that, so thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, representatives, for the work that you're doing to advance the discussion here on how we fund roads. When we talk about our budget, right, you talk about $83 billion, but we're talking about general fund. We have a $15 billion general fund budget. That's the general fund budget for the state. So reallocating $3 billion out of the general fund budget to roads, that's about a 20% cut to the rest of the general fund budget, more than the entire general fund budget for the Department of Corrections. I did see some of the work you were doing, I believe House Bill 4185, which does some backfill on school aid and some other funds. I appreciate that. I saw one of the backfills in there dealt with constitutional revenue sharing to try to hold communities harmless. And, I think that's important. We don't want to be cutting communities. I didn't see anything in relation to the other side of revenue sharing, statutory revenue sharing, which, we spent about $600 million on statutory revenue sharing last year, a little over $600 million. Seeing as that piece is not in the plan, and I know you guys are, I think, waiting till after CREC to do your budget, do you intend to hold statutory revenue sharing harmless?
I believe that is the intention, Senator Cherry, and to take it a step further, we're actually working on a comprehensive revenue sharing trust fund to ensure that stability in revenue sharing moving forward. So it's a very strong priority for myself and many of my colleagues as well, that statutory revenue piece of the.
Okay, so we can expect the House will advance a revenue sharing trust fund and put something in to hold statutory revenue sharing harmless?
I'm not the correct person to ask, but that is what I believe the intention is to not reduce revenue sharing in any sort of fashion, whether it be constitutional or statutory.
Okay, thank you very much.
And if I could just jump back to Senator Hertel's question, because I would feel remiss if I didn't lay out the benefits to your particular district, Senator. You say the money in this plan isn't going where it needs to go, but I would challenge you to reach out to every single one of your local government officials, and they probably support this plan. I'm looking at your largest city of St. Clair Shores. It's going to get an increase of $10.5 million. And I'm looking at Senator Anthony, your largest city is Lansing, where we're in right now. They're going to get an increase of $24.9 million. That's more than my entire county's road budget. So we're very much putting the money where it needs to go, and that's our local roads that have been neglected for the last couple of decades. Our driveway to highway plan here is a strong emphasis on local roads. We want to take care of you down in southeast Michigan. But when you talk about reforming PA 51, you are absolutely going to screw your northern colleagues. You're going to be peeling money away. Let's inject billions of dollars into the overall system and satisfy everybody, not take money from somebody else. Let's adequately fund the problem and address everybody's concerns. PA 51 has been amended like 200 times since its existence. It's not like we just wrote the law and didn't do anything with it. It's a pretty well thought out, comprehensive formula that we rely on for that stability, for us to be able to know what is going to be siphoned off through that formula and what are we going to receive.
Yeah, I would just say, Madam Chair,
Yes,
if I may.
absolutely.
I don't think it's fair to offer a community, any community in the state, more money and to simply say, this is the best deal you're going to get, so you better take this because you need it, where we should be actually fixing the problem that exists within the funding formula. I don't think anybody disagrees. Now, northern communities might benefit from Public Act 51. To your point about screwing somebody, I don't think anybody, if you want to talk about who is getting the short end of the stick here, it's been my communities for decades who has been losing out on road funding because a lot of that money leaves our county, leaves our communities, and goes to northern communities. And if you want to come down and drive on the roads in my district, and I'll show you all of the problems and show you the lack of funding we received because of Public Act 51 over the years, I am happy to have that conversation. But we shouldn't be asking people just to take the best we can give them. We should, as elected officials, actually solve the structural problem with our road funding formula. And it's not about who gets less based on what they have now. It's what actually makes sense for the people of Michigan. And I would say changing that formula actually is what makes sense for the citizens of this state.
And I'm just saying that.
Well,
that has
Representative,
trade-offs, that has impacts when you
I just want to get to Senator Demus because I want to make sure we have some balance in our questions. And I know you all have session soon, so I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to make sure we get as many questions in as possible. Senator Demus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I appreciate your work on this, and thank you for your words on Act 51, because we get sort of sensitive about this up north because the little population we have isn't the ones destroying our roads, frankly. But I appreciate your work on this whole proposal. I know it's the most fleshed out plan we've seen in years. I know these are complicated things, but I do have a concern about what you're doing with the corporate income tax, and I want to know how corporations are impacted, because Michigan has become, frankly, a very tough place for our corporations to do business in, and it's been going on for decades. One of the main reasons that places like South Carolina and Tennessee, for instance, even have an automobile industry to begin with is because of bad policy in Michigan, and no small part because of unfavorable corporate income tax situations. Does this package in any way, you mentioned it doesn't raise additional taxes, but I'm even concerned about de facto tax increase by losing credits that were promised long ago to our corporations. And I would just encourage you that as we go forward to take a serious look and really study, is this going to drive more of our important manufacturing businesses and corporations that we need to have, we build our economy on, out of the state?
I don't believe so, Senator. I think if we actually get to the root cause of a lot of our issues, why are our businesses leaving? A lot of it stems from poor infrastructure, from high energy costs, from poor labor, from poor workforce, poor education. If we address those underlying issues, the businesses will come to Michigan. We will be the next Tennessee. We will be the next Florida, the next Texas. We have to get to addressing those underlying issues. We cannot do these Band-Aid economic development approaches anymore. We can't continue to bribe ourselves into prosperity. We can't continue to bribe these corporations to either retain their operations in Michigan or to come to Michigan. At some point, we have to address these underlying issues. I think if we do that, infrastructure being one of the top reasons why corporations come to a state, if we start addressing those issues, they'll come, regardless of the incentives or not. And I'm not saying we don't have any sort of economic development plan whatsoever. I'm just saying that we need to maybe put it on pause for a couple of years until we catch up on some of these underlying issues. because I'm not seeing good results from these corporate incentives. I'm not seeing a great return on investment on any of these deals. And I think we need to get back to addressing these underlying issues.
4186 is the corporate income tax bill. It affects 8 legacy companies. This is not an across the board. There are 8 legacy companies that are still getting these credits, and we're encouraging them, if they want to take the credits, take them. But we're encouraging them to do and pay the same as everybody else. And again, Madam Chair, I appreciate your patience. Senator Cherry, the trust fund bills were 4311 and 4312. They were introduced yesterday, and those were bipartisan. Representative O'Neill introduced one of them, Representative Tisdale. So those have already been introduced. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Again, this is the appropriations room, and we don't, I'm just going to give an opinion, is that between Public Safety Trust Fund, Revenue Sharing Trust Fund, income tax, the shutdown prevention, and this road plan, I don't know how much money we will have left at the end of the day. So at some point, many of these concepts are going to have to transition from the press conference room into the balance sheet. And I am excited to really start to dig into the numbers behind many of these very costly plans. Senator Huizenga.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, representatives, for your presentation today. One of the things that I've been researching is the long-term costs for bonding of these roads. And I saw in the House policy analysis the significant cost of this over time. Nearly $4 billion has been bonded, and to the point in comments about Act 51, the interest payment on those $4 billion in bonds is approximately $330 million, my understanding. That comes off the top of Act 51. So when we talk about disparities, the bonding goes towards the trunk lines, but the impact is our cities and counties because they don't get that 331 because that comes right off the top. So I applaud you for considering counties and cities because that's where our people live, and we have to do, it's not either or, we have to do all of them, and so I applaud this position, and thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Senator Albert, and we'll follow by Senator Kleinfeld.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, I just want to applaud the House for what you guys have put forward. I think it's a very good plan. It's a very good starting point. Many of much of the conversation has gone, oh, how are we going to, figure out where the money is going to come from? That's what the whole budget process is for. We do that every year. We figure out how we're going to allocate our money to where it's best needed. So I appreciate you guys putting forward a first proposal. I think it's huge. One thing that is reminiscent of, though, is I remember in 2019, the House actually passed a budget proposal that did shift all the money at the pump to go toward the roads. And at the end of that budget cycle, Governor Whitmer vetoed all sorts of stuff, did the transfers of hundreds of millions of dollars, and then went out and bonded for $3.5 billion. It killed all future discussions with the legislature. It sucked all the energy out of the room to try to actually fix the roads. And I'm glad we're kind of trying to put the conversation back on track. I think you guys are really offering leadership on that. But I have a question about local roads, especially with that bonding. That $3.5 billion, last I saw as of last fall, $2.5 billion had been issued. So there was still $700 million remaining. I don't know if it was issued or not by the end of the year. But for that $2.5 billion, it was going to cost about $200 million a year in debt service. How is that money going to impact your local roads? Because all that money only goes to main interstate roads, main state highways. Are local roads also negatively impacted by that? And did that go into your thought process for your bill proposal here?
Yeah, and Senator Huizenga hit that because that payment comes out of the top before it ever gets distributed through Act 51. So I can tell you none of that came local. There was some extra bridge work, but it was a very small portion of what went on in the bridge safety projects. But the rest of it never came. So when we asked last year, when there was $9.2 billion in surplus to be distributed, we asked for a portion of that to go to roads. We ended up getting almost nothing out of that. So while we have been working on the highway system, as Mr. Outman said, we haven't done anything at the local roads where people live and people feel it every day.
And Senator Albert, could I ask you a quick question, just because you were the appropriations chairman for us in the House? Where is all our money going? I mean, when we go back to 2018, we were dealing with a $58 billion budget. As I mentioned in my previous testimony, we're now at 83, on the verge of 86. Where is all our money going? And why have we not seen a significant increase into our transportation fund?
So I'm going to actually ask you to ask your colleague offline where all the money is going, but most of that is at the Senate Fiscal and House Fiscal websites. I'm going to turn it over to Senator Kleinfeld, and then I want to do a time check, because out of respect for your session time, I don't want to hold you much longer. But Senator Kleinfeld?
Senator Hertel and I have already blown our tires out, and we're still early in the spring. So we're both pretty motivated to get something done in this realm, and I'm a huge believer in the money has to go to local roads. And I heard what you said about rural, and Senator DeMoose was the first one that said, but we're not the ones driving the heavy trucks on the rural roads up there that are doing the damage. And I totally understand that and agree. And I agree that we've had to build those roads and that we have to help maintain them. Where I'm having a hard time is, and we didn't do the Research Council's thing first, but they have the rural roads at 80% of them in good condition, as opposed to the urban roads down around 40% in good condition, and they have your poor condition is almost negligible as compared to our poor condition at 20% of our roads. So while we have been donor counties to you guys for a reason, rightfully so, there aren't enough of you to have enough money to build a road and maintain a road. We've kind of reached a tipping point that it's at the expense of our own roads, to the extent that we can't go anywhere without being screamed at about it. And I absolutely recognize that you've created a neighborhood road program, but you're still running a significant amount of the money through a formula that by its nature benefits the communities whose roads are in good condition at the expense of the communities whose roads are in fair or poor condition at a much higher level. And hold on just a second before you start speaking. So that's something that I'm thinking about and I'm mulling and I'm taking into account, because I am one that'll come to the table and negotiate. In the spirit of negotiation, though, I want to point something out to you. I can't even get my colleagues to agree to what I want to do with roads. How the heck are we going to get our colleagues to agree with what you want to do with the roads with respect to the rest of the budget? There are two parties involved here, not one. So this concept that we're going to cut our way out of this, end of story, because the money's there, as you say, look at how much we've risen, you've got to get the votes. And you're not sitting in a position where you're going to get those votes right now. So my position in this is, I appreciate that you've put forward a plan. I kind of say it's sort of a plan. It's a plan with a lot of this outstanding money that nobody knows where it's going to come from. And I just want to add one more thing. The very people, the very organizations that are supporting you in this are going to be the first ones knocking on your door when something in their budget is being cut to pay for this. So those are things that I'm grappling with, and I'm hoping you're gonna give us some hope here that you guys are coming to negotiate and are open to revenue.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And thank you for your questions and your comments. There's a lot there, a lot of unpacked. I would just start by saying we're not trying to cut ourselves out of this problem. We're trying to reprioritize existing revenue. That's the main focus here. We're not trying to drastically cut the budget, drastically cut public services. We're just trying to reprioritize some of that money to fit this need. It's one of the biggest needs in our state. And I would also challenge you on the 80% in good and fair conditions on local roads. I don't know where you got that number. I think it's less than 50% on.
They're using lane miles and not road miles. They're skewing the data to make it look better, because that's who paid for the survey.
But Senator, I hear you loud and clear. You guys need a lot of road work down in southeast Michigan as well. And we're making that a strong, strong emphasis. I look at your district, Senator Kleinfeld, your largest city is Detroit.
I've already seen the schematics. I appreciate that. That doesn't fix the underlying question that I raised. We can say what everybody's district is going to get. That doesn't address that my district would get more under a different formula, as Senator Hertel said. So we can go down that road, but I wasn't debating you. I was saying join me. Now you're taking me into a debate. And trust me, these people will tell you you don't want to do that. Thank you.
But we would love to have,
And
we
with
would love to
that,
have a discussion.
yeah.
Tell us what you will do.
Yes.
Tell us what you will do.
So I would just like to say thank you. Thank you to Chair Outman for taking the time just to kind of be the primary lead on this package. Thank you, Representative Kuntz, Representative Frisbee. We just appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know that there are conversations that are happening both in the public square as well as behind the scenes so that we can find a way to invest more money, but doing so with fidelity. So I just appreciate, again, you all coming, and please reach out if you have additional questions or follow-up. So
Thank you so much, Senator. I want to partner with you guys on this. I want to get our roads deal done, and I appreciate your willingness to hear us out today. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next, we will bring up the Citizens Research Council. We have Eric Lufer, who is the president of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. We also have Eric Paul Dennis, Research Associate of Infrastructure Policy, and Robert Schneider, the Senior Research Associate of State Affairs, to give us an assessment of Michigan's roads funding and the latest report. So thank you so much for joining us today.
To derive a best estimate of road program real purchasing power. So the blue line is our inflation-adjusted funding. In 2004, we spent about $5 billion in 2023 equivalent road funding dollars. Then with inflation, our purchasing power gradually declined until hitting a low of $3.8 billion in 2016, then began recovering. As of 2024, we spent about $5.3 billion in appropriated funds, which is about 6% more than we started with in 2004. If you include the Rebuilding Michigan Bond program, we spent about $5.9 billion. So that's a quick overview of our Michigan-specific historical funding analysis, but we also looked at this compared to other states. If you want to fairly compare Michigan's road funding levels to other states, this is a much more complicated question than you might initially expect. Without getting into the boring details of our methodology, I want you to know we want it to be as comprehensive and objective as possible, but still come up with a simple result and single ranking. So we combined multiple data sources from multiple years, evaluated in multiple ways. Here are the results from our state road funding analysis. We found Michigan to be the overall 30th most well-funded state using data from 2012 to 2021, which was the most recently available data at the time of analysis. And this table also shows how different methods of analysis can achieve different results. Our final index score and ranking was based on 4 individual methods of evaluation. So the first column shows that by funding per system mile, Michigan ranked 27th. The second category is funding per lane mile with an adjustment factor for bridge costs. There we rank 26th. The third category is by funding per capita. That is our lowest component ranking at 39th, and more urbanized, densely populated states such as Michigan generally rank low by this method. That's a feature of the approach, not necessarily reflective of low funding, at least not by itself. The fourth category is funding per truck VMT, which is an unusual way to compare funding, but I think this is really valuable to look at because trucks impose the strong majority of pavement damage and thus related maintenance and construction costs. As a peninsula, Michigan gets relatively little truck traffic. Here we rank 18th. So the final index score is a simple average of these 4 component index scores, deriving a ranking of Michigan as the 30th most well-funded state over this period. So now I've shown you 2 different frameworks by which we've evaluated road funding, a time series analysis of purchasing power from 2004 to 2024, and a state comparison using data from 2012 to 2021. So now let's move on and look at system conditions. Very briefly with bridges, this is some good news. Since 2004, we've reduced the percentage of our bridge infrastructure in poor condition by about half, and this is good progress. That said, you can see in the table on the right, we're still not doing great compared to other states. As of 2024, with 11.3% of our bridges still in poor condition, this ranks 43rd nationally and below all peer states except for Pennsylvania. Discussions of pavement condition in Michigan typically focus on data provided by the Transportation Asset Management Council. I expect you've seen this data before, and we use this in our analysis, but we display it a little bit differently. But I wanted to point out that the data I show on the next slide is this exact same data, just in a slightly different format. So the chart on the left shows our federal aid pavement condition data going back to 2004. Which is the first year this data was reported. You can see that in 2004, most of our federal aid network was rated in fair condition. Only 10% of the network was rated in poor condition, but this tripled in only about 5 years. On the right, I'm showing the percentage of the federal aid network specifically rated in poor condition, along with several forecasts. You can see that the forecasts have consistently predicted pavement deteriorating faster than was subsequently expected. Here's what I think happened. As you can see on the left, the initial years of PACER condition data showed a rapid increase in pavement in poor condition. I think this trend should be taken with a grain of salt. PACER is not a terribly objective metric. It's collected by Windshield Survey. It's a reasonable first pass assessment of pavement condition, but this is not something that would typically be used in pavement management. So I think we should think really hard about how we use this, interpret this data on our statewide network, and in the meantime, be cautious about interpreting this data too literally, as well as any funding needs estimates that might be based on this data. Fortunately, there are other ways to assess pavement, such as the International Roughness Index. Unfortunately, this is only available on the National Highway System, which is a subset of the federal aid network. So recall that our PACER data showed a rapid increase in poor pavement from 2004 to about 2010. The IRI data doesn't show this, and in fact shows an increase in pavement in good condition over this period. It's not impossible that the subset of the federal aid network making up the National Highway System improved while the entire federal aid network declined, but I think it's unlikely and again calls into question the utility of PACER data on which we largely base our statewide pavement asset management system and funding needs estimates. There are a lot of different ways you can break this data apart for further analysis. These are just a few key examples. And there's a lot going on here, but the main thing that I want to point out is that by each method of evaluation, we see a declining percentage of pavement in fair condition since 2004. I think this can be interpreted as an approach to pavement management that is inefficient and neglecting routine maintenance, allowing pavement to more rapidly fall into poor condition before reconstructing or rehabilitating it into good condition. And this trend shows up in state comparisons using the most recent data as well. Similar to our road funding index, we created a novel road system condition index. This is actually one table just split into two to help it fit on a slide. So top 25 states are on left, the bottom 25 states are on the right, with Michigan ranking 40th overall. As with the road funding comparison, there's a lot of data out there, a lot of different ways you can think about how to evaluate our roads and bridges. We wanted a ranking that is as comprehensive and objective as possible, so we used 17 different metrics converted into individual index scores, and then combined into a weighted average. Without getting into more detail, know that we were ranked Michigan 40th in system condition, and this was based on a fairly extensive analysis that I believe is reasonably well justified. So we have our road funding index that uses data from 2012 to 2021 and a road system condition index that uses the most recently available data ranging from 2020 to 2022. This gave us an opportunity to plot these together to try to understand how road condition is related to the preceding decade of funding levels on a state-by-state basis. The hypothesis being that generally better funded states would have better system conditions. Surprisingly, the data does not show that. There is essentially zero correlation between funding and condition when evaluated this way. This is not intuitive, but I've tested myself on this. I've looked at this several ways, and the conclusion holds up. However, while there's not a correlation, there is a tendency. There are 25 states in this box. So half of all states have achieved relatively good system condition with relatively low funding. Remember that Michigan ranked 40th in system condition, so there are 39 states with better roads than Michigan, and more than half of those states have seen similar or lower funding levels than Michigan, at least over the preceding decade. And there are a lot of caveats to this analysis, so understand there is some uncertainty here, but I wouldn't be presenting this if I weren't reasonably confident that it is telling us something important, specifically that it appears possible for Michigan to move up into this box and join this group of states that have achieved better road condition with similar funding. So our next thought was, even if there's no correlation between funding and condition across states, surely within a single state, more funding would make the system better off. And this brings us back to our time series analyses of Michigan's road program purchasing power and system conditions. We made a bunch of time series charts that look something like this. This one shows changes in pavement and bridge condition on the National Highway System relative to changes in inflation-adjusted funding. This is just one example of a way to look at this. And I'm going to skip some details and get to the point.
And I'm going to just quickly say, maybe you have about 7 to 10 minutes, just so we can also leave some time for questions.
Yes, ma'am. So these tables show an attempt to try to formally quantify the relationship between changes in funding and system condition. Passing over some details, generally when funding drops, conditions tend to decline, but not always. And vice versa, when funding increases, conditions tend to improve, but not always. Ideally, there would be enough of a relationship here that you could conclude something like what percentage of a funding increase would be necessary to get our system into acceptable condition. I think we can conclude that the funding increases since 2016 have improved our system condition somewhat, so that's good, but there's a ton of noise in this data. Condition and funding just do not seem to be related in a consistent way. I also want to point out that during both periods, we've lost pavement and fair condition. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when you see this over 20 years, regardless of whether funding rises or falls, I think this suggests some inefficiency in our approach to pavement management. Notably, this is not the case with bridges. There appears to be a different, likely more efficient strategy there. So the results of this study are kind of frustrating because neither our state-by-state analysis or the Michigan time series analysis show a clear relationship between funding and condition. Finding such a relationship was certainly a goal of this research. However, the lack of such a finding was not a failure. Instead, we've successfully shown that these are complex issues, and it's really important to think about how funding is used. In evaluating performance compared to other states, Michigan isn't nearly the worst, but I think we certainly have room to improve, and one place to look is our road funding distribution law, Act 51. I didn't focus on this when I presented the data, but there are several aspects of this analysis that suggest Act 51 does a poor job of distributing funding according to need. And moreover, if you read Act 51, do your best to try to understand what it's doing, there's little reason to believe that funding would be distributed according to need. Despite the hundreds of amendments over the past 74 years, the distribution formula retains a 1950s era understanding of needs and prioritization. This may have made sense at one point, but I don't believe it makes sense anymore. And I don't know exactly how mismatched with needs Act 51 is, but I do have an idea of how to find out. This is complicated, but civil engineers and researchers have done incredible work in the last couple of decades to figure out how to estimate life cycle costs of pavements using something called mechanistic empirical analysis. The output of this analysis is a forecast of pavement conditions across 4 key metrics: IRI, rutting, faulting, and cracking, each of which can be collected with automated equipment at reasonable cost, allowing you to monitor the conditions of the pavement relative to expectations. You can then pair this with something called performance-based planning and programming to estimate when maintenance and rehabilitation projects will be necessary, and then you can plan to fund those projects at the appropriate time. This can be really time-consuming if done very formally, but a cursory analysis that uses generalized bins of road types could provide a very good idea of our road funding needs on an annual basis. Currently, our approach to estimating funding needs looks basically at how much we have spent in the past and how that has related historically to conditions. But that assumes that any inefficiencies from previous years will be carried forward. And also, our analysis shows that funding and conditions have not been historically closely related. So this may not be a best approach. I think it would be very valuable to understand what our system should cost if managed according to best practices, and this is possible. So I know it would be a heavy lift to create an entirely new approach to road funding. I think it would take more study, difficult political discussions, and probably couldn't be done within a single year or even a single legislative session. But I think it would be imprudent to keep using the same approach and expect different results. There are also other aspects beyond our distribution formula that we think we could be doing better. Our recent report discusses several of these, and Mr. Lufer is going to focus on one of them, local option revenue.
So this hasn't, to my knowledge, really been part of the conversation right now. And I try to think about what other government service, there's a cooperation between state and local government, and when the local government doesn't have the resources it needs, it's all the state's fault. So I want to introduce the idea that we should be thinking about local option taxes as part of the solution. Why would we do that? Well, because not all roads are created equally. The interstates obviously serve statewide purposes. Collector roads and local access roads, much less so. So should we treat them all the same? We don't think so. And we think part of reforming Act 51 is part of that, but also thinking about whose responsibility is that. Second, as we've discussed many times, if you're just pumping more money to Act 51 as is, you have to overfund many counties up north, so many rural counties, to get the needed funding to the urban counties. Either fix Act 51 or come up with a better means than property taxes to do this at the local level, maybe both. Third, the benefit principle of taxation suggests that the misery of raising revenue should accompany the pleasure of spending it. This is not all the state's fault that we don't have the resources we do. It is the state's fault that you haven't provided the means of local government to use anything other than property taxes to come up with local resources. And finally, we do rely on the property tax, and we're overusing the property tax in Michigan to the point where it is becoming a disincentive to be in the state with the resources here. We have 39 other states authorize local option sales taxes. Michigan is not one of those. The light blue states only have state sales taxes, and the white ones don't have any sales tax at all. We have 24 states authorize both local option fuel taxes and vehicle registration fees. 2 states only authorize local option fuel taxes, and 8 states authorize local option vehicle registration fees. Michigan authorized the registration fees at the county level many years ago. The counties that tried to do it couldn't get voter approval. Michigan, as we look at local government, local option taxes, has very few options available. Even among our neighboring states, we're very low. These next slides suggest if we're going to do this, the city and village, city and township level is not the place to do it. We should be doing it at the county level. So in the interest of time, let me turn this over to Bob to talk about the House plan and some of our findings from that.
And I assume we still have time. I could probably 2 minutes if you have it.
2 minutes would be perfect.
Okay. I will, can everybody hear me? I'll try to be brief. Can you advance when I?
Just the space bar.
Yeah, okay, good. So one of the questions that was asked, and Madam Chair, it was one that you raised at the beginning of the meeting, was, okay, so in the bigger picture, what does this mean? You're an appropriations committee. What is this going to mean for budget deliberations? If we shift a lot of revenue to the roads as a priority, what does it mean in terms of the budget cutting that will come? This table attempts to summarize that quickly. On the top, we talk about the $3.2 billion in new transportation revenue that the House plan would generate. And again, the 2 primary sources are a shift in corporate income tax revenue that now goes to the general fund, general purpose, and it goes to transportation instead under the House plan. And then it's the shift of the sales tax to increase the motor fuel tax by roughly 20 cents per gallon. So sales tax on gas down, motor fuel tax up, so that it's roughly offsetting. That shifting revenue. So it's revenue that would otherwise land in the general fund or in some other dedicated fund, and now it's going to transportation. What does that mean then for the overall budget, and particularly the general fund, general purpose budget? We drew on the House Fiscal Agency analysis and then our own analysis of the executive budget. If your starting place is the February executive budget recommendation that you're considering now, here are the factors that will hit the general fund. So you'll lose the $2.2 billion in general fund from the corporate income tax, the CIT revenue. You will lose roughly $120 million directly of sales tax revenue that would have gone to the general fund. And then, as was discussed today, to ensure that school aid and the school aid fund and the constitutional revenue sharing was held harmless. There is a dedication of sales tax revenue, $755 million to the school aid fund, 95 to constitutional revenue sharing to hold those things harmless, but that comes out of the general fund. So that would then add to reduced general fund, general purpose revenue that we would see. The House plan does have the one-time, it generates one-time revenue of $600 million in general fund in fiscal year 2025 by the early cancellation of the corporate income tax earmarks to SOAR, to the housing and placemaking funds. If you assume, and I assume the intent there is to help use that to offset the revenue loss in 26, that still gets you to about a $2.5 billion decline in general fund, general purpose revenue that you would be looking at in the 26 budget. And that basically means that the governor's budget essentially spends all of the ongoing general fund, general purpose revenue. It does contain at least $500 million in budget enhancements, new stuff that the governor's proposing to add to the budget. So let's say you just zero all that out. No more, the new stuff has to go because we don't have room in the budget for it. That would still leave about in the neighborhood of $2 billion in general fund, general purpose revenue that would have to be cut from that February budget proposal. And we just highlight here again, what does that mean? And we've done some blogging in the past on this. What does that general fund look like for fiscal year 26? Almost half of it is Health and Human Services. About 12% is the university budget, about 14% corrections. 25% is all the other stuff. I should mention, because statutory revenue sharing was mentioned earlier, that's not appropriated as general fund, so that would be sort of a separate bucket, about $600 to $700 million that's appropriated as restricted revenue, even though it comes out of our general fund, our general fund numbers. So in short, that's 12 or 13% of that general fund budget would have to be trimmed back in some way, and doing that without hitting Health and Human Services and universities, potentially statutory revenue sharing. The corrections budget is a hard one to cut unless you make major reforms to how many people are in prison. Can you do that? Yes, you can do that. But it's those areas that would be the primary areas that that can currently get that general fund, general purpose appropriation. And I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the report. And members did receive a copy of the full report as well as this PowerPoint presentation. Were there any questions related to the presentation and report? Senator Schenck.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that I didn't hear you discuss, so I realize you might not be able to at this point, is that sorry, I have notes and I can't see them because they're too tiny. But so we have a situation where we have a lot of semi trucks on our road. And so one of the things that I'm wondering as we think about that and think about funding is how much damage do the semi trucks do to our roadways relative to passenger vehicles? And to what extent are those companies that benefit from the semi trucks bearing those costs? And to what extent are regular Michigan taxpayers subsidizing them?
So I mentioned current best practices of pavement management, particularly design, use this process called mechanistic empirical analysis, which is only about 20 years old. I graduated in 2006, and I didn't learn this. But the way that we design pavements now, and MDOT has adopted a version of this process, passenger vehicles are not included in a calculation of pavement damage. They're essentially negligible. We start at Class 4 commercial vehicles, which is basically a box truck, up to, I think it goes to Class 12. But so when we're looking at how to measure pavement damage using best available current data, passenger vehicles are essentially a rounding error. All pavement damage is a combination of truck traffic, climate and weather, as well as things like drainage could come into play. But as far as pavement damage, trucks do the most of it. I don't have an economic analysis for what that means in terms of who's paying their fair share. But as a rule, nationwide, trucks underpay for the damage that they do to their roads, but keep in mind that trucks also run the economy, so I don't think it's necessarily a problem that the rest of us subsidize truck traffic on our roads. It is just a feature of our system.
And I'm going to get a few more questions and then I'll try to come back. Senator Baer, followed by Senator Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I got to say, I, as a geek, loved the presentation. Would like to talk to you for a couple more hours. So it's pretty evident, though, what we can clearly see is that the Act 51 model doesn't work anymore. We're putting money into places where it isn't really needed, and we're ignoring or not putting enough money into places where we really need it. That much seemed pretty basic. There's other things about local road funding that I wonder if you saw anywhere else in looking at other states or in our own models. One of the things that's a big savings for local roads is doing the dig once concept, right? And trying to integrate the different needs, like the infrastructure that's under the roads. Have we looked at that? Is there something we can do or some ideas that you have that could help us really get more bang for the bucks that we do have? Put the water under there and do the upgrades to those ancient water systems at the same time.
Yes, in I think the very last section of the report, in the very last chapter, we do address some things that we think that Michigan could be doing better in terms of not only dig once, but more generally coordinated infrastructure planning. Michigan is already doing some of this. I think we could be doing more, and to be fair, this stuff would be really hard. We would have to re-envision our infrastructure systems more as a coherent engineered system rather than the way we do it now, which is, you think about a right-of-way, you've got your road out there owned by one agency, you've got your sewer agency, water, gas, whatever. And so we have like a tangle of stakeholders fighting over how to use that right-of-way. And it would not be easy, but I think there are opportunities to take more of a leadership at the state level and help these various entities better work with each other and give them incentives to do so.
A key finding in our, as you said, that this already exists, but it's very voluntary. And the fact that we don't see it enough suggests voluntary approach isn't working. So state leadership on that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Senator Cherry, followed by Santana.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. So you kind of talked about, you had your graph in the top left corner, there's the box. You said, this is where Michigan wants to be. And I agree with you, like it intuitively makes sense, but breaking it down, right? That box is good road condition, like that's what our constituents care about. That's what we care about in the end, right? Good road condition and least money needed to be spent to get to that goal, right? So that's like the efficiency. How efficient can we be and achieve good road condition? And lots of states in that box. The question that I have for you is have you looked at what the difference is in how they're utilizing their dollars are and how Michigan is utilizing its dollars? Is everything boiled down to Act 51, Public Act 51, or is there more that we need to be aware of in terms of what the difference is between those states who've gotten the efficiency piece right to get them to good road conditions?
I have not been able to really look into how other states fund their roads. I've spent so much time trying to figure out what's going on with Act 51, I just can't get there. One thing that I can say is that very consistently, when you look at the road and bridge condition data from federally available data across states, Michigan tends to have, relative to our percentage pavement in fair condition, a relatively high proportion of pavement in both good and poor condition. So I mean, if you think of, and I'm going to overgeneralize this, but you think of most of a pavement's service life should be spent in fair condition, right? Not quite new, hopefully not failed. And so you think of a typical state, you probably see kind of a hill. Michigan has more of a plateau. We seem not to be maintaining our pavements in fair condition as long as we could be. They seem to spend some time in good condition and then sort of quickly go to poor condition. And so I think that gets to more of a pavement management program than a distribution formula. But there are things in our distribution formula that you can also look at. Somebody brought up earlier that our national highway system routes, our rural national highway system routes are actually pretty good. We have 7% by lane mile or I think it was 8%, 80% by lane mile in good condition, which ranks 7th nationally. So there are things like that we can look at, and none of this is definitive. There are so many more ways to look at this that could give us hints, but in that data, I do see approaches to long-term management that seem to be less effective than a typical state.
So it's not just how you fund your transportation program, it's how you spend the money in your transportation programs.
That's the message we're bringing to you today, yes.
One slide that I just wanted to ask a question about related to the local tax options, because it's something that, as you mentioned, hasn't really been a part of these conversations. Do you all have any commentary or preference on the effectiveness of, the multitude of local tax options, local registration fees, income tax? I know there's a lot of ways to do it, but did you all have any opinions on the effectiveness or ways that we could get creative in terms of bringing in more money to solve these local problems?
So we're here today talking about road funding. So we start off thinking about the fuel tax and the vehicle registration fees. We know from other conversations that the fuel tax is a diminishing source of revenue with EVs and hybrid vehicles, but it's an immediate source of revenue that reflects where the traffic is actually taking place. The local option sales tax, again, it's a huge hurdle to face to get it to Michigan, but it again reflects where the commerce is, where commercial activity is taking place, would reward northern counties because of the tourism, travel, and things like that relative to the population in place. So those are the places we would start when we're thinking about road funding.
Thank you. Senator Santana?
Thank you. Along those lines, you talked a little bit about 30 other states who provide some type of innovation of working with their local counties to provide some similar sales tax to help support road funding. Is there a state that's doing this well? Can you elaborate on that?
A lot of them are doing it well. Michigan has become so tied to the property tax. Everything that's a problem, we use the property tax, and now we have communities levying 80 and 90 mills, which becomes a disincentive to be in those places. So any type of diversification, and the sales tax is very, you see from the map, very popular on how other states approach providing the resources to their local governments to fund transit, to fund arts, to fund roads, to do just a multitude of things. And then the property tax can be part of the package, but not a burden like we've made it in Michigan.
Do you have any projections on, for those states who are doing that innovation as far as sales tax, what their revenue upticks were, over time, or maybe over the last 5 years or so?
I don't at this time. We're digging into a study to try to come up with that type of information. I don't have it today.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good opportunity for us to really look at being innovative. I mean, we've seen where in the last couple of consensus revenue estimate conferences where people in Michigan do spend money. And I think it's an opportunity, because people are buying online and, we have seen our revenues uptick, and I think it's a great way to look at funding those local roads if there's an option for that. So thank you. I look forward to the study.
Thank you. Senator Albert?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, first off, thank you so much for this information. It's very helpful. I appreciate all the work that went into it. I did have, I guess, one of the previous speakers had mentioned the road quality for the local roads. It got me just thinking about the methodology behind how some of the stuff was calculated. So I don't know the process for this. Is there like a peer-reviewed time frame after you guys release this or before you release it? Like, that's common in academia that they're going to come out with a report. It's peer-reviewed and people can make comments on it. So I guess, how does the methodology get verified?
So it's very important for our independence and nonpartisanship to do our work independent. The work that Eric's been doing on the road funding, the condition, we've put out a number of short essays in 2024 that we're biting off bits and pieces of this, and we have interacted with the County Road Association and MDOT and others. When we had our final report that we published in March, we didn't farm that out to anyone else to get feedback. It was internally reviewed.
Okay, thank you. Senator Heisinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation today. You gave a report that talked about something I'd never heard before, this condition of International Roughness Index, which I thought was fascinating. But you also talked a little bit about the complexity of repair and thinking about that. Have you done any benchmarks of the type of surface that we put down? So thinking about benchmarks of these other states, if they're going to be heavy concrete, where it seems like when, frankly, the guys that drive back and forth to Lansing all the time, we see a lot of labor that goes into maintaining the concrete, redoweling, lots of lanes closed for extended period of time versus asphalt. Is there a total cost of ownership model that says one product is better than the other, and maybe not absolute, but in general what we see? Because it seems like we see a broad mix of those things. Even we look at the repair 496, we've got a combination of asphalt and concrete in there. I never really know what the real answer is there, but it seems like there should be a study, and I love the model of total cost of ownership.
We haven't looked at that specifically. I can say that the Michigan Department of Transportation, when they design projects, they incorporate a version of this mechanistic empirical analysis to come up with a life cycle cost analysis for their designs, and then they will either choose one, or if it looks close, they'll put out more than one option to bid. And it can depend on a lot of different things, how much truck traffic you have, the sub-base you're working with, if you're building on clay or sand. So it's very difficult to generalize, but those questions are answerable if you make them more specific with a reasonable amount of confidence. But on a statewide basis, it's really hard to say we should be using concrete or we should be using asphalt or anything. It can depend on a lot of different things.
Thank you. And then final question for this portion, Senator Tice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for presenting today. Have you looked at the additional costs that we could create for ourselves in the event that we have too many projects going on at the same time? So you're competing for the same labor force, you're competing for the same equipment, you're competing for the same gravel. At what point are we increasing our own costs because we're doing too much? Have you looked at that?
Not exactly. That's interesting. But I have thought about this and poked into it a little bit. For example, I was curious when we passed the Rebuilding Michigan bond funding package, which increased our state funding, at least temporarily, quite a bit. If we would see some evidence that led to higher costs. And it's hard to divide out because they happen to overlap with a period of very high construction cost inflation. But Michigan's construction cost inflation during that period was actually quite a bit lower than average. So it didn't seem to make that much of a difference, which I thought was interesting. Wasn't not what I expected. Maybe there's better ways to look at that. I haven't done it formally, but from what I can see, we do so much all the time that giving it a little bump didn't make that much of a difference. Maybe even helped out with economies of scale.
I think his reference to the national, right? We had the federal infrastructure bills. Now 50 states are competing for the same materials, same labor force, and we saw incredible cost inflation for the road-related materials, the labor, the steel, the aggregate, everything else. So that is certainly part of it. We're not going crazy here in Michigan building roads. It feels that way because we were so low. There's still lots of opportunity to employ more people and do more things, so.
I understand that we have a lot more road we have to fix. Please understand, I'm not saying we're doing too much with respect to fixing the roads, but I came across quite a few people who had, their employers had purchased motorhomes for them because they were from out of state and they needed a place to live while they were repairing the roads. And when I asked how common that was, they said it was literally every job that they knew of. So I'm wondering if some of the costs didn't get put in a different bucket than what we would normally expect, road repair.
Yeah. You know, part of that might be where that road is as well. If you're doing this in Southeast Michigan, there's a lot of opportunities to find labor. If you're doing it up near Gaylord, a thinner workforce to draw from.
This was Southeast Michigan.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Albert, in relation to your question, Eric also took his matrix of cost of condition to the Transportation Research Board, and it was peer reviewed and recognized through that.
Yeah, aspects of this, particularly the road funding index analysis, has been peer reviewed and was quite well received.
Okay, and lastly, Senator McMorrow.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here and for your presentation. As I contemplate all of the states that are in this box that we would ideally like to be in, something that has come up among my constituents, and I would love to know if there's any research on, it seems like as a state, we invest very heavily in new road innovations, butterfly merges, new traffic circles, lane expansion, traffic lights to merge onto a highway. And it seems like more so than in other states, perhaps at the expense of road maintenance, that we're tearing things up, investing in new things that my constituents kind of report seems very expensive to be implementing new ways to get onto the highway, perhaps at the expense of just maintaining that highway or the local road. Is that something that you've been able to look into, how we compare to other states in terms of the types of projects that we invest in?
No, that's an interesting question. I suppose that's possible. I would say that generally, if we're doing some kind of adjustment with how traffic flows, it's probably around the time that that road would be scheduled for rehabilitation anyway. I think it would be rare that we would be ripping up new pavement just to put in a traffic circle or something like that. But short answer is no, I haven't looked at that. It's a good question.
I would encourage you as our state policymakers to think beyond just the condition of the road, because safety is important too, and a lot of those are driven by safety.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all again for coming and presenting today. So I wanted to carve out roughly 7 to 10 minutes, if you members can please hang on for a few more minutes, to bring up the Senate Fiscal Agency, just because I wanted to add some finer points to both of the presentations that we have seen today. So thank you for your patience. We'll be wrapping up in a few moments. All right, we will be joined by Catherine Summers, the Director of the Senate Fiscal Agency, David Zinn, our Chief Economist, and Bobby Cannell, who also serves as one of our analysts on the transportation budget, just to give us an assessment and maybe just a few slides related to the issues that we've been discussing today.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Catherine Summers. You have copies of this presentation at your desk, and there we go. We're going to go, I think a lot of the slides have been covered already, so I'll go fairly quickly and try to focus on the ones that haven't been touched on so much in depth. Okay, so this, again, most of these things have already been touched on. We have a one-slide summary here of the 9 bills from the House Roads package. So this is focusing just on the House Roads package itself, so less on what CRC covered in terms of roads and more in terms of the House Roads package. So there are the 9 bills. There is a table in here that shows the estimated hit adjustments by fund. So you can see the estimated impacts on this table. This would, the first 2 columns would be for local roads and the state trunk line fund. You can see we estimated at about 3.1 billion of additional revenues. And then on the general fund side, $2.9 billion reduction, and the other funds, school aid fund and revenue sharing, as has already been discussed, more or less held harmless. So this is sort of a one-page quick summary of the fund impact. I want to also say, though, we did publish an analysis of the package, so that should be out on the web, including distributions, our estimates of distributions by cities, villages, and counties. So that's up on my leg. The next thing would be just a couple notes on our fiscal impact, and I'm just really briefly, because some of these things have already been talked about, the bills would stop the CIT earmarks for SOAR and revitalization and placemaking in the current year. So this is the third of 3 years. Those earmarks were treated as one-time revenue because it had an end date. They were 3 one-year earmarks. So they had been treated as one-year revenues when the budgets have been decided the last 3 years. The fiscal impacts, and I'm going to turn this over to David and Bobby in a couple minutes. There is a break-even point with this whole sales tax, eliminating sales tax at the pump and replacing it with a gas tax increase. There is a break-even point there on the price of gasoline. So anyway, there's just some nuance there. I won't get into it at the moment. Over the long term, relative to current law, you'll see increases to the transportation fund, the trunk line fund, the neighborhood roads fund, et cetera, but a large decrease to the general fund. Because the earmarks to school aid fund and revenue sharing are fixed in statute to hold them harmless today, and they're not adjusted for inflation over a very long term, you would have, a lower revenue compared to what they otherwise would get on current law. So I'm going to turn this over now to David and Bobby to go through the distribution pieces.
So the package generates about 3.2 billion of road funding, as you've already heard, and as has already been discussed, most of it ends up going through PA 51. All of the money from the change in the gas tax would go through PA 51, and a fair amount of the money that would come from the CIT earmark would also go. As you can see here, roughly a little less than 20% of the CIT earmark gets devoted to the neighborhood road fund, which is the only component that does not use PA 51 to distribute money. In terms of how PA 51 distributes money, this is kind of a simplified graph. There are a bunch of off-the-top deductions that come out. The largest one is $50 million that's fixed for debt service the earmark for comprehensive transportation fund. Some of the deductions off the top actually then re-enter the formula down at the bottom, along with money that comes from the income tax and the marijuana tax. Once it gets there, it's split basically with counties getting a little less than 40%, the state trunk line fund getting a little less than 40%, although 33 million of that is then carved out to go to counties and cities and villages through the local roads program. And the remaining amount ends up being distributed to cities and villages. Now, the formulas after you get there get a little more complex. I'm not going to walk you through these other than to highlight a couple of the components. Most of the distributions for counties end up relating to mileage. There are some adjustments for local roads that reflect rural population. And for counties on primary roads, it's heavily related to vehicle registration taxes, which of course in 1951 were based on the weight of your vehicle. Now it is based on the value of your vehicle with a depreciation. You can see that only explicitly is 10% of it put into urban areas. Just a typo where it says urban roads. It should have been primary roads there, but essentially the key components for counties are going to end up being mileage and registration taxes. When you go to cities and villages, once again, there are some off-the-top deductions, and then it's divided between major streets and local streets. There's roughly a 50-50 split, actually it's 60-40, between population and mileage, although on major streets, the mileage is weighted by population. So road mileage, not lane mileage, but strict road mileage plays a lot in how the money is distributed.
Thank you. What we have here is a map of the changes per for each county based on the House's bills. We have the darkest blue is the highest quintile increases by county. The lightest colors are the lowest. This is in a change in total dollars, not per capita. If we look at the per capita changes, we can see that under our table here, we have the highest 9 per capita counties and the lowest 9 per capita counties, along with the average. Keweenaw County in the UP is the highest per capita, a little over $1,100 per person, while Washtenaw County, where I happen to live, is the lowest with $162 per person. If we look at what the House bill will change, we split that into 2 columns, the Neighborhood Road Fund, the NRF, a per capita for that, and then the total per capita increase, which would be everything that goes through Act 51, as the NRF is separate from Act 51. And in the final column, we have what the total per capita would be under the House. As you can see, Keweenaw still remains at the top at $1,500 per person. The new lowest, however, is Livingston County at $256 per person. However, what we notice is that the structure really didn't change. It just reinforced the ones that were at the top and the ones that were at the bottom in a per capita basis.
And I'm going to actually pause there. We do have a member question. I'm going to pause for Senator Irwin.
So just to summarize and clarify what I think you just said. The lowest funded counties in the state, which by the way, just by looking at them, looks like at least half of the state's population. I mean, I don't know if you know what percent of the state's population is in that group of the 9 lowest funded. But what it also looks like the House plan does is it takes a system whereby currently the counties at the top with low population generally are much better funded than the counties where the people live and the economic activity are. The House plan actually, rather than addressing that, punctuates it. It actually makes the inequities greater. Is that true? And do you have any sense of what percentage of the state's population are in these areas that are the low funded areas?
Well, we do have the 2020 census population in that out of roughly 10 million people. So that would be, do some quick math in my head. Is that about 4 million people? So yeah. Maybe 40% of the state live in those 9 counties. As David mentioned, 90% of this money is going through Act 51. So they're not really addressing is that that statement. Correct, yes. Roughly 90%. So it's not really addressing any inequalities that already exist in Act 51.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to make the point that not only does it fail to address sending the money where it needs to go to actually fix the problem, it actually punctuates that problem. It actually means that the counties that have the lowest spending per capita, the gap grows even more. Keweenaw is obviously an outlier, but the gap between the per capita funding in some of these counties and others is, 5-6 times X, multiples.
Well, and I think one of the reasons we broke out the neighborhood road fund is because that's not going through Act 51. And you can see that kind of the relative distributions, even among high funded counties on a per capita basis and low funded, is a different distribution than PA 51.
It may be a different distribution.
So the neighborhood road fund, because it uses a different formula, does not amplify the distribution on a per capita basis.
I appreciate the technical point you're making, but when you look at the numbers, there still is generally a trend where counties that are the counties that have less neighborhoods get more money from the neighborhood fund.
Well,
and counties that have more neighborhoods
so
get less money from the neighborhood fund. If you're gonna have a neighborhood fund, shouldn't the counties with the most neighborhoods get the most money? That's how I would think of it. But
Thank you, Senator. So Senator McMorrow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to build on that point. As we're looking at the breakdown, what becomes apparent is, when we talk about cost per capita, yes, that's people, but more people also equals more vehicles and more traffic. And we see kind of the exacerbation of the issues from Southeast Michigan to Northern Michigan. And I don't think anybody here is arguing that Northern Michigan receives less, but how do we equalize the funding so that what I appreciated of the Citizens Research Council report was an analysis based on the condition of the roads is something that perhaps we can consider as we move forward in this committee so that we are funding the roads that need it so that more of our roads statewide are at the quality that we see in more of our outstate areas. How do we help Southeast Michigan catch up?
Yeah. So in the interest of time, I wonder if we could just skip to slide 16 to end our conversations, which is, just a few notes related to the impact of the balance sheet.
Is it, which slide 16 is it for you? Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. So yes, you have a notes on balance sheet piece here. So the CRC, Bob mentioned that when they looked at it, he had a number of what you would need to cut off of the governor's budget recommendation. I looked at it, pulling the adjustments to the school aid fund and the general fund, put them into the balance sheets and compared it to what we're looking at for the current year, the budget that's in place right now. And on that, in order to get the general fund balance sheet to balance both this year and next year into FY27, so the budget that's being worked on now, FY26, along with FY27, if I use the revenue estimates from January, if I assume no new investments, so simply taking today's budget, adjusting for necessary cost increases, those kinds of things like DHHS caseload costs and those kinds of, economic adjustments, baseline cost adjustments. I removed the $75 million per year public safety trust fund because the bill hasn't been enacted yet. I know that's a policy decision, but that's just on the balance sheet because it's not yet been done. You have a couple of options. I'm calculating because there is some one-time savings that we talked about, the $500 million SOAR being stopped a year early, the $50 million RAP grants, some other things. On a shorter-term basis, I come up with a $1.2 billion general fund shortfall for the 26 budget. That then in 27 you would need to cut another $937 million or so. Or you could address the structural deficit sooner by cutting 1.7 billion in ongoing GF spending, starting with the 26 budget. And again, that would mean no new investments, but taking off from the baseline budget that is in place right now. I'll say that's probably, that it's likely that by the time, again, and there are lots of assumptions and estimates, these are based on the January CREC numbers. It's based on the governor's budget recommendation for costs, just not the investments, but for costs. There's very little being assumed for 27. And I think by the time we get to FY28, there would also need to be additional cuts at that point. So that kind of highlights where this would impact the budget, the appropriations side of things. There are some other notes here. I'm not going to go through them because of time constraints, but happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. We did put in here, I know there was a question, what does this look like? What does that kind of look like? I think we're in the same percentage ballpark that was mentioned by CRC. I think Bob said 12 to 13%. That's what I have as well. I have 12.5%. You could cut the across the board budget by 12.5%. Other big ticket GF sort of discretionary items in the budget would include statutory revenue sharing or university operations. As mentioned under the CRC slides, DHHS makes up about 50% of the general fund. Then you have corrections and the other things too. So, if these costs for the roads, or whatever, if you needed to make reductions and DHHS is half the GF side, that would be something to possibly look at. We include some slides here, or some programmatic pieces on DHHS. They're in the next slide. So that's what we've got. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I think we'll have our final question from Senator Albert.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for this presentation. If you had to estimate how many total line items are there in the budget, I'm assuming it's in the thousands. So I'm a little confused as to why on this slide we've narrowed it down to just a handful out of many thousands.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we calculate, well, it's an estimate. We look at we have something that we publish once a year where we estimate sort of discretionary general fund. A lot of it is tied to mandatory things, caseloads. You'd have to make whole scale other types of programmatic changes. So it's a good question. These are some of the big discretionary that the legislature has control over.
The legislature's not limited to these.
Absolutely not. And that's why the very first bullet says it could be across the board for every budget.
Yeah, we've added thousands of FTEs over the last handful of years. I don't know the exact numbers on those. Increases have been dispersed throughout every budget.
Right.
The legislature has the prerogative to go into each individual budget and look at each individual line item and see what they'd want to fund fully, what they might want to reduce, and make decisions on a case-by-case basis, do they not?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Senator. All right, and thank you. Thanks to Senate Fiscal for joining us and just, again, bringing things together. I believe Senator McCann supports that we adjourn, or moves that we adjourn, with Senator Kleinfeld agreeing with that and supporting. So without objection, the Senate Committee on Appropriations stands adjourned.